In this lesson, I'm going to talk about variable scope. It's a very short video. It's a simple lesson to learn, but we'll revisit this notion of scope throughout this series and once we get into object-oriented programming in a whole other series. But at a high level, I can kind of sum it up in some words, but the code example that we get into will probably resonate with you a little bit better. But variables that are declared outside of a code block are available to all lines of code that are also outside of a code block, as well as code that's inside of any inner code blocks. Okay? However, variables that are declared inside of a code block are not available to any lines of code outside of that code block. Okay, again, an example here would be probably pretty beneficial. You can open up this project. It's really simple. I just have an OK button, but it's in the before folder of the CS-ASP_024 folder, which you can download wherever you're watching this video, wherever you originally downloaded it. Okay, so if I were to do this, int x equals 1, I can access the variable x pretty much anywhere inside of this code block. This code block is defined by an opening and a closing set of curly braces. All right. So this particular code block has a name. Not all code blocks do, as we'll see in just a moment. But at any rate, I can access that variable from any code that's kind of at the same level. Okay. So let's do something like string result equals x.toString, and that obviously will work. Let's just go ahead and select the build option on the debug menu, and it will show us if there's any errors. All right, so the build succeeded. That means that our code compiled. Also, we can create this block of code. If x is equal to 1, then we can do something like x equals 2. We can change its value. So we're able to access the variable x inside of an inner code block. So this x is defined outside of this code block, but we can still access it inside of this code block, and then again outside of the code block. However, the reverse is not true. So we cannot do this, int y equals 3, and then do something like this. String result equals y.toString. See, I'm fighting IntelliSense now because I want to type the letter y, but it doesn't show up in IntelliSense. Instead, it comes to the first keyword, yield, and so that's when I started typing. It went ahead and typed out the entire word for me. I have to hit escape on my keyboard to get rid of IntelliSense, to force it to take y, and that's called what I call fighting IntelliSense. Now, you can see that when I attempt to do this, there's all kinds of red squiggly lines. A local variable named result is already defined in the scope. All right, well, that makes sense. But how about this other one? The name y does not exist in the current context. Why? Because it's actually defined in an inner code block in a different context. All right? So we would have to comment that out. All right, now, what kind of prompted this discussion was that I created a variable outside of the OK button click event. I created it here in this outermost code block. Now this outermost code block belongs to something called a class named default. Now, we're not ready to talk about classes and objects just yet. However, we can create variables at the class level and have them accessible to any code blocks that are inside of that same code block. So I can do int z equals 0, or actually let's go string just for fun. String z equals empty double quotes. All right. Then we can use z both in the page load, so I can do z equals hello. And then I can also use it inside the OK button click event, z plus equals Bob. And I can even use it in the inner code block in the if statement, z plus equals Tabor. All right, and if we ran this, the same variable z would be available. It would be set first in the page load event because that fires before the OK button click event. And then it would fire off this line of code and then this line of code, and the final string would be hello Bob Tabor. All right? And that's literally all that you need to know about variable scope at this point. So just to recap, and I'll use this little phrase that I used before, variables declared outside of a code block are available to all lines of code that are also outside of the code block, as well as code inside of all inner code blocks. So int x is available to all lines of code outside of the code block, but it's also available to all lines of code inside of any inner code blocks. All right, but variables that are defined inside of a code block, like int y equals 3, are not available to any lines of code that are in outer code blocks, like this line of code here. Okay, so that's all that I wanted to say about variable scope at this point in time. As I said at the very outset, this will be a topic that recurs over and over throughout this series and in the object-oriented programming series when we talk about scope and accessibility. All right, so let's move on, keep pushing forward with these little distinctions that we're making now, and we'll follow it up in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks.